inclusion, diversity, equality, wide skies.
Welcome to our first episode of Wide Skies. I'm Martin York.
And I'm Debbie Watt. And thank you for taking the time to listen to our podcast, and we hope you enjoy it. We're going to be exploring different aspects of wellbeing, inclusion, diversity and equality throughout the series. And we're aiming this at anyone interested in being more inclusive with those they work with, the people they meet, and the people they care about. So there'll also be tips to help you look after your team and your colleagues.
Yeah, and I'm very much looking forward to exploring these with a number of different guests that we're having on this series. A little bit of an introduction for who we are, first of all, so that you can get to know us. I'm an independent consultant and an inclusion advocate. I help organisations and community groups of all shapes and sizes to create a really safe and supportive environment for their employees, volunteers and service users. And I also volunteer for a charity to help combat bullying in schools. And I'm involved in the development of the UK's first LGBT majority purpose-built extra care housing scheme in Manchester.
And I'm a coaching psychologist with over 18 years experience in delivering coaching and training interventions. My focus is on supporting individuals and teams to navigate through challenge and change to achieve their chosen outcomes. I'm passionate about promoting mental well-being and fairness in the workplace. And I also have a personal interest in neurodiversity and living with lifelong health conditions. So I'm going to start by giving a little bit more information about how we met. We're from completely different ends of the country.
Yeah.
Martin's up in Manchester, I'm down in Cambridge, but we actually joined forces.
We were both invited to take part in the annual conference and exhibition for the Chartered Institute of Personnel and Development, or CIPD. So we hadn't met before, and through mutual contacts, we got invited to take part in a particular thing they were doing for the first time, the course delegates. And the purpose of doing this thing that's called a people library was to give the course delegates an opportunity to engage in a completely different way with people, to hear about lived experiences and hear a number of different perspectives that they may not have experienced or come across before. And we were each asked to create a personal story which would last for about 10 minutes, and then the people could ask us about them. And we needed to think about key takeaways that the course delegates could translate back into their own workplaces that would be useful pieces of learning for them.
Yeah, no, this was definitely not your typical library. There were 2 bookcases furnished with cards. Now, each card was like the back of a book, and it had, as like the back of a book, it had a picture of the author and a summary of what they were going to be talking about. And the idea was you picked up the card, if it was one that interests you, and then you'd make your way to the table where the storyteller was, and you sit down and you share 10 minutes with them, where you told them, they told you their story and you shared your experiences with them, which is really fun. Now, there were some great stories there. There were 25 in total. There was one looking at modern slavery, which is closer, sadly, than you would think. There were ones around how to be a fostering friendly employer, and menopause. So a lot of the subjects that maybe can be a little bit taboo or we don't talk about. Then there were also topics around apprenticeships and how to change careers. Now, my story, I was simply looking at sustainable returns to work after long-term sickness and absence. Now, a lot of the time when people have been off work, the workplace can lose touch with them. So I'm talking about sort of over 6 months absences, and you can get a lot of worries around sort of talking to your colleagues, etc. So I gave some examples of clients I'd worked with who had successfully returned to their own work, or they may have returned to a new career. But some of my main takeaways were around making sure you keep in contact with the person. They were a friend before they went away. Just because they're away from work, don't leave them hanging. Things like upskilling or changing roles, to make sure it's nice for someone to come back, and actually properly understanding the reason why they went off. So that was what I shared, and it was lovely having the experience to talk to a lot of people who maybe hadn't really thought about it before. Martin, would you like to share a little bit about your story?
I told a story which was very personal and does touch upon some of the things that Debbie's already mentioned as well. I went through a period of redundancy, and it wasn't the first redundancy exercise I've been through. I've been through many over the years, but this one in particular ended up with me being made redundant. I'd been fortunate prior to that not to have been caught in the redundancy net. And I actually learned whilst I was being made redundant that I was suffering from anxiety and depression. And I actually had quite a long bout of anxiety and depression where I got to see a psychologist and learnt a lot about me and a lot about what was going on inside my head that I thought was long buried. So it was a really enlightening experience, and it gave me a chance to press the reset button and really understand a little bit about what the important priorities were in my life. One of the things that we were asked to do was to think about the key messages that these listeners could take back into the workplace. And I just wanted to share the things that I shared with my listeners. The first one is you never know who's experienced the same sort of thing that you're going through. I was really fortunate that I had a manager who I didn't know particularly well. He was quite new to the company. But he said something one day that meant that he really understood the position that I was in. And I don't know whether that's through personal experience or it was through observation of somebody that he was close to. But that was really valuable because it meant that he understood where I was and what I needed. And the other thing that was really important to me as well is to not judge people if you get a negative reaction because you don't know what's going on behind the scenes. We all have multiple identities. And when we go into the workplace, we only reveal part of that to our work colleagues. And I think it's useful for us to remember behind the scenes that there can be a lot going on that we don't necessarily know about. So just taking a few minutes to think before you act and before you judge people. I think the other observation that I would make about taking part in the People Library as well was that it gave us an opportunity to meet people that we might otherwise not have met. And the other thing that I found quite amusing as well was that having the photos taken for the books, and I still got mine.
Oh, I lost my photo somewhere in Manchester.
It didn't end up in a bar somewhere, did it?
It might have.
I'd certainly do it again in a heartbeat.
White skies.
So we're going to spend a little bit of time on this episode talking about what we mean by well-being and equality, diversity and inclusion. They sometimes get used in slightly interchangeable ways for EDI in particular. Debbie, do you want to go through what you view well-being as being?
Well-being is a phrase that's used an awful lot these days. And I like to consider that it's more than just a state of feeling healthy and happy. No, the World Health Organization talk about it as health is a state of complete physical, mental and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease and infirmity, which is true, but I don't think it really gives us this full idea and sense of what is well-being. Now, I like to think of well-being in 5 different areas. So you've got to think about your psychological well-being, your physical well-being, your social well-being, your vocational well-being, and your practical well-being. You need all of them together. When you miss one, you will not have well-being overall. But we will discuss these more later on. So really it is about having a state of satisfaction in these different areas.
Well, I thought it was interesting the way you were saying about the fact that you need all of those. So effectively, much like a jigsaw puzzle or pieces of a pie that come together. And when I'm doing training or consultancy, one of the things that I like doing for equality, diversity and inclusion is a cake analogy, because I think it works quite nicely. Diversity is about all the different ingredients that you have for your recipe. And then inclusion is the recipe itself. And so that's really about bringing the ingredients together. And then equity, so you think about equity as being trying to achieve an equal outcome rather than the outcome itself. That's about recognizing there's a natural variance in some of the ingredients that you have. So if you're making a cake, you might have larger or smaller raisins or slightly more porous flour that needs more liquid in it. And so that's really about adjusting the recipe to produce the best cake that you're going to produce from the variety of ingredients that you're going to be using. And I realise it's a bit simplistic, but I think it's important because lots of this really isn't hard. Because I think sometimes when people talk about inclusion, they're a little bit not scared of it, but they think it's a new project or something that is going to be done to them. And it feels a little bit other and over there. And it's not really. So simple things that are inclusive and equitable. You might invite somebody who's junior or a new joiner to chair a meeting for the first time. So that's given them the experience of doing something new, and it's also given them the exposure to people as well. And listening, I think listening is really, really important, and be in the moment listening to somebody as well. So giving them your full intention and be receptive to what they're saying and maybe what they're not saying. And I think the last one that's really important for me is not making assumptions, because if you don't know something and if you haven't had the lived experience, you might not know what the right answer is or the right way to interact with somebody, and you might make a mistake. So I personally would always ask what people need rather than just doing it and assuming that I know all the answers.
Yeah, I would 100% agree on that. People don't tend to get offended if you ask politely. I'd always prefer to be asked than things to be assumed. So, we're talking about well-being and inclusion, diversity, and equity. How do these concepts overlap? Now, in my own practice, I kind of see the other end. Like Martin said often, it's, this is a course you've been on. It's a tick box. Your employer said you have to attend this course, and which is good. You've attended the course, you're a little bit more educated, brilliant. You've got a better idea of the quality, etc. But on the other end, I see the output, what happens if people aren't treated fairly. I see the mental health effects of marginalisation and exclusion. I see the fears around going back to get work because of how you've been treated, how you perceive you're going to be received. So, the effect of that is a breakdown of your well-being. So like we said, vocational is part of your well-being. If you're not happy at work, or social, if you're not effective in your social life, your well-being is going to be badly affected, and that's going to be leading negative things such as mental health problems, withdrawal, etc. So I think they really do fit up to each other very nicely. I think you agree with me.
Definitely, and you're hearing you say some of those things. It takes me back to when I had my anxiety and depression and thinking about all the experiences that I had. And of course, sometimes if you're going through that sort of emotional turmoil, then things that are rational to you in your day-to-day life suddenly become very exaggerated, and it's very difficult to be able to work out what the balance is sometimes, and so there's a perception and a fear of things happening. If we think about inclusion versus exclusion and the sort of stuff that I talk with my customers about, that you can have groups that are sort of the insider groups and the outsider groups. And the thing is, if you're in the insider group, so you're in a group where you're not being oppressed, you're not being excluded, you're not being bullied or marginalised, it can be very easy not to spot that other people have inequities, that other people are suffering, other people are being excluded. And of course, when you're in the out group, and so you're being marginalised or excluded or isolated, that really triggers the stress. And of course, there's the link that you just talked about between lack of inclusion and poor well-being, poor states of mental health. But of course, most of us want to be liked. We want to be respected. We want to be wanted. We want to feel like we belong. And that's one of the fundamentals of being an inclusive workplace, being an inclusive colleague or an inclusive friend. And of course, most of us generally want to say and do the right thing, but sometimes we don't know what that is. And I'm hoping that through this series, we'll be able to explore some practical tips about things that you might be able to try, building people's confidence, trying new things for the first time, but also recognizing that it's okay to make mistakes. We're human and we're fallible. It's what you do about the mistakes that's
Most
the
of us,
important thing.
I'd say the majority of people want to be kind, and sometimes the behaviours that have caused maybe one of my clients to be upset by something, the person who's doled out that behaviour would be mortified if they knew it had caused offence. So that's why it's good to talk, and these sorts of forums are very helpful.
I think the other part for me as well is around disclosure. So as a gay man, I've been through disclosure many times over the years. And each time you meet somebody new in the professional environment, you have to think about that first conversation that you're going to have around the vending machine or in the restaurant, when you're just getting to know each other and what did you do over the weekend? And then you get onto the subjects of partners and families, and you have to take the plunge at some point if you're going to disclose and think, is now the right moment? How is it going to be received? And so on. And of course, lots of people don't feel comfortable to do that for whatever reason, and that's perfectly valid. But the thing is, if somebody hasn't disclosed, that means they're hiding part of who they are. And that can be incredibly stressful and debilitating. And the challenge is that
we want to be accepted.
Absolutely. Yeah. But of course, if you're holding something back, generally, even if people can't read between the lines and know what it is that you're holding back, they sense there is something that's being held back. And that can lead to situations where you might get little bits of mistrust, or people might be misinterpreted. And so that can quickly erode relationships, and people see you as being quite cold and standoffish. And we're going to talk a little bit more about disclosure in a future episode.
Those elephants in the room, which they need to see this the light of day. And I think many of us have more elephants than we really want to talk about, but everyone's got them.
Yeah, and I know you're going to be talking at some point about an elephant.
I am indeed. I'm dyspraxic, so I'm neurodiverse. I specialise in neurodiversity. I also have MS, so a lifelong health condition, and particularly the latter one, I've shied away from disclosing because I've been worried that people will assume that I can't do my job, so I might not get the job. There's a lot of reasons why we hide.
Yeah.
But like Martin says, people maybe think that you're just very over private, or you don't like to talk, or a bit offish. No, there's usually reasons why.
Yeah, definitely. And it's okay not to disclose, isn't it? We aren't saying that everybody should always disclose everything. Everybody needs to do things that they feel is right in their own way and in their own time. And to be inclusive and supportive, then it's important that you recognise that you should never force somebody to disclose. I think another element of inclusion that's really important for me is about representation. Business in the Community, the Prince of Wales charity, has done lots of research and published reports on mental health at work and the stigma surrounding it. And by doing that report and talking with many of their member organisations about it, it's unlocking the key to make it okay to talk about this. And of course, for men in particular, talking about mental health historically has been a significant challenge, as I'm sure you've experienced, Debbie.
Yeah, when I first started training as a psychologist, the figure was 1 in 8 of us, I think it might have been even 1 in 10 of us, will have a mental health problem in our lifetime. And I thought, that's not right. That does not represent my community, my family, my friends. I think it's much lower. It's much higher number there. And I think it's more like 1 in 3. Currently, they're saying 1 in 4. I think, to be honest, if it's not you, someone who you really care about that does experience mental health problems, it's all of us really. 1 in 2, if I'm going to be generous, but it's a big problem. And the world's a very hard place to be in. Of course, we're going to be stressed. This is not a problem. If we stop thinking it as a problem and think of mental health, so improving our mental health. Sometimes when things are difficult, we might have a mental health difficulty. It's just changing. If we think of more like a gym type model where we can improve our mental health by developing skills, etc., we can become stronger rather than it seeing a weakness.
You're absolutely right. You mentioned mental health to people and they assume poor mental health. They don't assume the wide range of positive and negative positions that you can have on that. And I think breaking down those stereotypes and having more conversations about it is incredibly useful.
There's a lot of stuff from the CIPD, as we mentioned, how we first met. There's a lot of really good information about how it benefits your bottom line. If the organisation known as a positive place to work, where employee well-being is looked after, you're going to get a lot more people.
It's no longer a nice to have. We shouldn't still be talking about the business case for any of these things. These are things that are fundamentals for the health of a business, because almost all organisations are based on people.
Common sense. This is common sense stuff.
It is, yeah. I wanted to go back to when you were talking about the 5 different elements of well-being and self-care. Can we explore those a little bit further?
Yeah, definitely. Well, we can think of it in 2 ways. We can think of these in terms of self-care, how we look after ourselves, but also we can think about how we look after others as well, those people we care about, maybe our colleagues. So psychological, how can we improve our psychological health? Mindfulness. I'm a mindfulness practitioner. I know, Martin, you like mindfulness too?
Something I guess is quite fundamental that I hadn't even realised was mindfulness when I first did it, was just being in the moment and focusing on something that you have complete control over. So it might be an object that you like looking at or something that you enjoy holding, and just enjoying doing that, listening to a piece of music that you enjoy, that sort of thing.
Yeah. So that's lovely. I quite like mindful walking. Going along and actually, feeling the ground beneath my feet, and what I can smell, what I can hear, what I can taste, in the air, etc. And
so I guess that leads quite nicely onto physical as well, because that sort of straddles both, doesn't it?
So So also with psychological, I think there's something about just knowing, just understanding what's going on with you. So understanding what happens in your body with anxiety. So if you can start to understand the sensations when you start to get anxious, and you can start to put things into place to like calm down, to relax, and breathing exercises. So understanding that relationship between anxiety and how you feel physically and how you might behave. So you might notice that when you're anxious, you might withdraw. And the more you know about yourself, the more you can make positive steps to manage that better. Physical. Physical's a bit easier, isn't it, really? We can do a bit of exercise. You can do that mindful walking, like I said. What sort of stuff do you do physically for your well-being or for the well-being of others?
So I also like doing relaxation techniques. I remember years ago, I used to have a stammer. I still have a stammer. I've learned how to control it over the years. And one of the things that I was taught when I went on the residential course was about how to relax my body. So relaxation techniques. And the woman that ran the course would just speak in a beautifully soothing voice. We'd close our eyes, we would tense up each of our muscles and work up and down our bodies. And then relax them, and you just eventually feel like you're floating. And it was a really simple thing to do, but boy, did it make a difference.
That's a lovely exercise. It works really well trying to get to sleep as well.
Yeah.
Progressive muscle relaxation. Yeah, no, I like it.
Yes.
Social. I actually just on the physical. So I said we'd be talking about helping others, just encouraging people to get up from their desk, inviting someone for a walk. Psychological. It's sort of talking to people about mental health, about how they're feeling. So back to social. So social, well, what can you do to improve your social well-being? It's about meeting people, isn't it? I think maybe giving an old friend a phone call.
Yeah, I think making connections is really important, especially given the fact that we've been through the coronavirus epidemic. Sometimes it's still a little bit hard when you try and reconnect with people because there has been so long since you spent time together, and you have to relearn how to engage with people. And it's become easier for us all, I think. But I think relearning those skills is really valuable, and as you say, spending time with people that you care about.
Yeah. No, that's a really good one. I think there's been quite a lot of time when we didn't see smiles because they were hidden behind those masks.
Yeah.
So getting back out there, and now things are opening up. Joining a club, find something you enjoy.
Do a bit of Zumba.
Join a club, meet some people who share interests, and vocational. So work is a huge part of our life. We get so much from work, a sense of meaning. Social contact, going back to the social side of things.
Yeah.
Achievements, recognition, very important. So how can you improve your vocational well-being? And it doesn't have to be work. It can also be education and volunteering, of course.
Yeah, and that's part of the reason why I do volunteering. I do a small amount of volunteering for a charity that you do telephone befriending of older people who are isolated and lonely, and it's really nice to build a relationship with them. I have an older person who I've been speaking to regularly for about 18 months now, and she and I have a real good rapport. We've always got lots to tell each other, and I really look forward to the calls.
Excellent. So that improves both of your well-being, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Excellent. And then the practical side of things.
I wonder whether something like taking up gardening might come into that, because although it's physical, it's also helping with your garden, and you get the satisfaction of seeing seedlings grow. And
your environment, isn't it? That's your environment. That's your home.
Yeah.
I think being able to go through your front door and you see something growing by the side of your house that you've grown, lovely. So definitely gardening's a lovely idea. Also houseplants. I'm a big fan of houseplants. Practical stuff.
Lovely.
So all these things can be helpful.
Very much so.
And we will talk more about these in terms of the well-being section.
As we record this episode, we're still experiencing high cases of COVID infections, and that they have dipped, but they're going up again. I suspect it's going to be around for at least the foreseeable future. And of course, there is a war in Ukraine, and these will all impact on everybody for some time to come, and are driving some quite polarizing positions in many ways that many of us haven't experienced before. And I think finding the art of compromise and recognizing things that we have in common is really important for us to be able to rebuild and enhance relationship. We seem to have somehow sidelined that in recent years, and it's very easy for us to take extreme positions on many, many things, most notably on social media. And sometimes for my own well-being, I just put the pause button on occasionally and leave it to one side. I think one tip for being inclusive that I just wanted to come back to is about if you're not sure what the right thing is to do or say for another person. So if there's somebody in a minority group and you're thinking, I'm not quite sure what the correct term is to use here, or I'm not quite sure whether they want me to do something or not, then as Debbie said earlier on, just ask them. That they'd be most happy that you're A, showing some interest, and B, checking what's appropriate and best for them, rather than just assuming. It's being consultative rather than just taking the decision away from them. And we're going to be exploring more about things that you can do to be a better ally in a separate episode of Wide Skies.
So what are these other episodes? Well, just to wet your whistle, we're going to be thinking about what makes you smile, mindfulness and wellbeing. Why do we find it difficult to talk honestly and openly about racism in the UK? And allies as superheroes. We'd love your feedback and to hear your comments, questions, and any tips you'd like to share.
Contact us at linktree/Wide Skies, where you can also find a link to the captioned version of this podcast.
The next bit that we're going to have featuring regularly on each of the episodes is a little bit of self-care, and these are tips and self-care techniques that Debbie has kindly put together for us. And here is the first one.
Wide Skies Self-Care.
My well-being tip for today is to be your own best friend. Imagine a scenario where you've done something wrong at work. And as you sit there, you might find yourself thinking, you fool, why did I do that? My colleagues are going to be so angry at me. I've lost their trust. I'm a failure. Now, these are words a bully would use, so you must be bullying yourself. But you probably wouldn't even say these words to someone you don't like. The difficulty here is that these negative thoughts can feed into a downward spiral, which may lead to low mood and reduced confidence. This is something that needs to be addressed. Now, I find one of the best ways to stop these thoughts in their tracks is to start thinking about what you would say to someone that you care about, to a friend, and say it to yourself. So I might say, it's not that bad. We all make mistakes. Colleagues will understand. And with a friend, you may even start to support them to make an action plan to turn the situation around. That's something you can do for yourself. So next time you experience negative self-talk about anything, it may be things you feel that you should do, your abilities, what others may think. Try and be your own best friend and watch yourself turning the situation around.
Wide Skies Self-Care.
I really enjoyed listening to that, Debbie. I think it's a really fascinating way of doing things. Just enough is sometimes perfectly okay. You don't need to always be perfect in what you do.
It's important to recognise it's very common. We're all tough on ourselves.
Yeah.
So thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed it. We look forward to catching up with you on our other episodes.
Guy reached 2-2 of a safe onward flight.
Wellbeing, inclusion, diversity, equality. Wide Skies, a podcast produced and edited by Majoya Consulting in collaboration with Bridgeborn Psychology.